Good morning, everyone. We give you the warmest welcome to the 9th World Conference, IZA, Employment and Development. We will have the welcoming remarks by our rector, the PhD Felipe Portocarrero.
Good morning, everybody. A pleasure to have you here. On behalf of the Universidad del Pacífico, I am pleased to welcome you to the 9th Conference on Employment and Development here in Lima. Let me say a few words about our institution. Since our foundation in 1962, our aim was to create a modern and high-quality academic institution oriented towards applied economics and management as well. Our mission has been and is to educate citizens, to develop their professional skills, and to ensure that they have the ethical values required to manage the country's economy and enterprises efficiently and responsibly. Thanks to the efforts of those who manage the university during the first 5 decades of its existence, public opinion perceives us as one of the best institutions of higher education in Peru and the clear leader in our main fields of concentration. This reputation has been achieved thanks to the effort of our professors, the quality of our students, and of course by our alumni, many of whom work at the top of their fields in the public and private sectors in Peru and around the world. At the Universidad del Pacífico, we have no intention of merely resting on past achievements. On the contrary, we continue to nourish a spirit of modernization and permanent innovation, and we try to transfer this spirit in every academic meeting we convene. I'm sure that the intellectual exchange of experiences and findings that you will have over the next 3 days will broaden our perspectives and understanding of what is happening on the current global development and employment landscape, and that distinguished professionals reunited here at the Universidad del Pacífico will provide stimulating proposals for the years ahead. Thank you all for participating in this 9th IZA conference. Bienvenidos a la Universidad del Pacífico a todos ustedes. Que tengan muy buenas jornadas. Gracias.
Now we will have the opening remarks by Mr. David Robalino, who is the labor team leader at the Social Protection and Anchor of the World Bank.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. In the name of the Employment and Development Program at IZA and the World Bank, welcome to this conference. For those of you coming from abroad, welcome to this very beautiful city of Lima. I hope that we are going to have, all of us here, 3 memorable days together. As you saw, I'm not part of the program. I wasn't supposed to be here delivering the opening remarks. The person who was supposed to be here is Arup Banerjee, who has been recently appointed as the Senior Director for the Social Protection and Labor Practice, Global Practice in the World Bank. And because of his new responsibilities, Arup wasn't able to come here. He deeply apologizes. The fact is that he needs to open his shop by July 1st, and he still has many things to do in between. But Arup asked me to share with you a couple of thoughts, messages. The first one is about the importance of partnerships such as the one that we set up to organize this conference. IZA, the Inter-American Development Bank, the OECD, Universidad del Pacífico, and the World Bank working together. Working together in what we call the jobs agenda. As many of you know, the international community is embracing these twin goals of eradicating poverty by year 2030 and promoting shared prosperity, essentially making sure that the earnings of the 40% of the income distribution grow at least as fast as the earnings of the top 60%. And this, you will agree with me, can only happen if workers, most workers, have access to the right jobs, since for most of us, jobs are the main source of income. And here the problem is not unemployment, at least not in developing countries. Two more serious problems are the fact that around 1.2 billion people are simply not working. They do not participate in the labor market. And among those who are working, 50% are farmers, own account workers, mainly involved in very low productivity activities, often household enterprises where they don't get paid. 60% of them are poor. The question for all of us here, the students, those working in academia, those working in think tanks, in international organizations, the government, is how do we collaborate to find those solutions that countries need to implement, not only to increase employment rates, but also to increase the productivity of the jobs that are already there. Skills development policies, which is the topic of the conference this year, is part of the solution. But as we all know, we're still struggling trying to see how to design and implement these policies and how to make them work with other policies together. So I hope that over the next couple of days we'll be able to reflect about this. The other message, RuPaul will insist about this, is to remember that the value of this conference, as interesting as the various sessions are going to be, and we have an excellent set of papers this year, the value of this conference is bringing us together. It is in the discussions in the hallways, over coffee, lunch, at the bar later tonight, that new ideas emerge, that new partnerships are created, and I hope we're going to have several of these emerging over the next 2 or 3 days. Let me end by simply thanking the members of the organizing committee of this conference, the members of the scientific committee, and a special thanks to our guests, Universidad del Pacífico, the faculty, the students. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for making this happening. And they have promised they're going to have big screens so that we can follow the World Cup, at least during the breaks. All the best during the next 3 days for all of you. Thank you very much.
Now I would like to introduce to the chair of the keynote address, Mr. Stefano Scarpetta, Director of Labor and Social Affairs of the OECD.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, a big welcome also on my side. I'm Stefano Scarpetta. I'm also the co-director of the Program of Work on Employment and Development, a partnership between the Institute for the Study of Labor and the World Bank. A big welcome to all of you. I'm here on 2 hats, so let me start with the first hat. First welcoming on the side of Klaus Zimmermann, the director of the Institute for the Study of Labor. Klaus will join us later, but asked me to convey to you the appreciation for the fact that you are all here and looking forward for the discussion we are going to have in the plenary, but also in the different parallel sessions. I think David already said, but I really want to express our gratitude and be very thankful to the Universidad del Pacífico, Director, Professor Yamada. It's a great pleasure to have been working with you in organizing this event. As David said, this is really a partnership. It's a partnership between researchers, between international organizations, between universities, and I think it's really the work together, the partnership that makes a difference. This is not just yet another academic conference. It's a place where we want to share ideas, common thoughts, and also maybe engage on future research. I also would like to welcome the participation of the Inter-American Development Bank, has been a partner in organizing this conference, has been extremely useful, and we thank them also for joining us in this conference. Now, The way in which we organized the previous conferences is that we always identify one particular theme that we would like to focus our discussion. This does not prevent to have a number of other parallel sessions covering a wide range of issues we link together employment and development. As David said before, for this year we have chosen one which I think is an extremely important topic, the one of skills for productive employment and development. This is really an issue that cuts across all countries. I don't think there is any countries that has found the right way to basically build the right skills, improve and adapt these skills so that workers can not only find a job when they enter the labor market, but they can move on once they are in the labor market. We know that the issues are, there are many challenges here. The challenges of building quality education and allowing people to have access to quality education, to offer a wide range of skills, that is what the labor demand and the market ask for. But also, if allow me, there is an even more important agenda, and this is about the fact it's not just about building skills, but also maintaining and improving skills for those who are already in the labor market. The issues are very much different across the board, but I think all countries struggle to build, reinforce the education system, but also build and reinforce the training and retraining programs that have to be in place in order for workers to move on in their career and to give a good, strong contribution into the economy and into the labor market. Now, I think we are very lucky here because to kick off our discussion today, we have a very good friend and certainly an extremely knowledgeable person, Professor Gary Field. Gary is actually, among the many things, a very good friend of this program of work. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, you have been following all of the conferences, except one. I think we can accept that. And I think Gary knows very well the work we have done. Actually, Gary has been supporting this work since its very beginning. You know all, Gary Field, but let me say a few words of his impressive CV. He's a professor of international and comparative labor and professor of economics at the Cornell University. An impressive academic career, if you like. He got a PhD from Michigan. He became assistant professor at the age of 25. He was associate professor at the age of 29. And 2 years later, he actually took a tenure professorship at Cornell University. I don't think I'm minimizing here, but I think Gary is really an institution at the Cornell University from very different points of view. First of all, because he conducts research on labor economics, workplace management, and development economics, but also because it's a source of inspiration for many students. I was impressed by looking at his CV. If you look at how students rank Gary, he's always at the top. So obviously, not only is a very strong, deep economist, but also an extremely good teacher, a communicator, someone who can really inspire others on the importance, the relevance of our work. He's, of course, the author of many books and many publications in top economic journals. I think he has been a source of inspiration and in-depth thought on many issues, including on how we have to look at the labor market in terms of what is the framework on which we have to have behind whenever we look at labor market policy, institution, and labor market outcome. He's also actually someone who developed even statistical tools that help all of us in our econometric sort of technical analysis. And of course, he's someone who can really bring together different perspectives. The perspective of development economics, the perspective of labor economics, and of course, I'm sure also how skills fit into that. So with no further word, I think I would really appreciate if you can join me in welcoming Gary Field here to deliver our keynote speech. Thank you very much.
So thank you for that very kind introduction. Thank you also for organizing this program and this series of conferences. I've been to all of them except for that one in New Delhi. Not because I don't go to New Delhi, it's just that it was held in the middle of a semester. And I have 100+ students I need to teach, and I couldn't make that one. But this conference is really an inspiration to me in terms of the opportunity to do what you said, to exchange ideas with each other, to find out what people are working on, to give presentations, to get feedback and commentary. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. The emphasis on skills takes me back a long time. The title of my PhD dissertation, which was a few years ago, was A Theory of Education and Labor Markets in Developing Economies. So how the education market, the labor market fit together was actually an important theme then, and I'm going to talk about that today. I'm seeing the presentation. You're not seeing the presentation, so could somebody just put this up? Okay. While you're doing that, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to start with a joke, and the joke has a serious purpose. And that is, those of you who've been in the profession for some time know this joke already. If you're new to the profession, this is something you need to know. And that is, it's a dark, rainy night, and an economist is on his hands and knees on the ground under a lamppost, rummaging around and trying to find something. And a passerby stops and says, what's the problem? May I help you? And the economist says, yes, I lost my keys. And so the passerby starts helping the economist look for the keys. This goes on for some time, and finally the passerby says, where did you drop your keys? And the economist says, over there. And so the passerby says, well, why are you looking under the lamppost? And the economist says, because the light is better. Now, we economists tend to look where the light is better and not necessarily where we've lost our keys or where we need to find our way. And the whole purpose of this talk is to try to suggest how that might be done in the context of looking at employment, development, and skills. So David and I circulate many of the same circles, and so the problem what are we looking for? I just have this slide. It's the same problems you mentioned. The extent of poverty in the world, 3 billion people in the world who are living on less than $2.50 per day, adjusted for what money will buy. The global employment problem, while there are 200 million people in the world who are unemployed, 900 million people in the world are working poor. They're working, but they and their families are not earning enough to get them above $2 per person per day. Those two problems, to me, are the major economic challenges of our time. And this conference is about those challenges. And so I'm going to use this then as the basis for the talk that I'm about to present. So how might we go about fighting poverty? What this conference is about, what a number of us are about in our research and in our teaching and in our policy work, is to try to fight poverty through the labor market. And so the question that can be asked is, of the various policies in the labor market and policies that impinge upon the labor market, which ones would help reduce poverty the most? Let me be clear about the definition of labor markets. I speak as a labor economist. A labor market, to a labor economist, is the place where labor services are bought and sold. Some people sell their labor services to other people. Those are workers who sell their labor services to employers. Other people sell their labor services to themselves, and those people are called self-employed or own account workers. And the poorer the country, the larger the percentage of people who are selling their labor services to themselves. Labor market includes self-employment as well as wage employment. It includes agriculture and non-agriculture. And so when we speak about workers, we speak about, using the ILO definition, people who work even 1 hour a week for pay or 15 hours or more a week not for pay. It includes people in agriculture and non-agriculture, and it includes the wage employed and the self-employed, and those are the definitions that we'll be using here. Okay, the spacing isn't quite right on this slide. A job is not only, or even primarily, wage employment. A job also includes self-employment. These bars are some of the percentages of the people who are in self-employment in various developing countries of the world, and you see that those percentages are all above 50%, except for South Africa, which is really an outlier. And in South Africa, there's very little self-employment, and why there's very little self-employment is in large part a legacy of that country's terribly unfortunate history with apartheid, and it's a whole story in and of itself. So the question that I would ask is, again, the spacing isn't the way that it had been when I prepared this, how would the labor market policies that we talk about affect people like these? These people are the ones that are on the cover of my latest book, Working Hard, Working Poor. And the reason I put their pictures on the cover is partly I know them because I lived with several of them for a period of time, and partly because as I think about these various policies and what issues to work on, I keep trying to picture in my own mind, how would people like these be affected? Sometimes, how would these people themselves be affected, but how would others like them be affected? Just to tell one story, the woman in the upper left, her name is Kalavati. She hand rolls bidis, which are a poor person's kind of cigarette in India. She's a member of a million-woman labor union called the Self-Employed Women's Association. And Kalavati herself is one of 150,000 bidi rollers who belong to this association. And so the question that we might ask is, what could be done to raise her earnings? Would it be through providing her with more skills? Would it be providing her with some sort of machine to help her do her work? Would it be by automating and eliminating her job, but raising, quote, the productivity of people who produce bidis? And we want to think what would affect her and what would affect people like her. Not just her, but all of them taken together. So I would ask that as you think about policies in the course of the discussions we're about to have, picture your version of people like these. And ask the question, how would they be affected by the policies, by the research that we're talking about? Now, as we do that, and this applies specifically to the context of educational policy, we need to be careful about misplaced aggregation. Of course, it's easy to think about what would help any single individual. Okay? What would help Kalavati would be to get out of rolling bidis. And in fact, my wife and I provided her with sewing machines so that she and her family could do exactly that. But that was our personal intervention with somebody who came to be, she's well known enough so that when I go to India, the students at Cornell ask about Kalavati and did you see her and how is she doing? And so she's world renowned. Okay, but she's just one person of among 3 billion poor people. And so we want to consider what would improve labor market conditions, not just for her, but for all of the people like her. And that's the question, that's the challenge to face. What would help one of them may not help all of them. Okay? If she were to be provided with a machine that makes her more efficient at rolling bidis, that would help her. But if all of the bidi rollers are provided with such machines, there won't be as much opportunity for bidi rollers to earn a living that way. That's the misplaced aggregation that I'm talking about here. So here's a basic theme that I'm going to be developing in this talk, and it's the idea that sound labor market policies require sound labor market models. You can't do policy analysis, I believe, in a theoretical vacuum. That there needs to be an analytical framework guiding our formulation of policies. And so what would sound labor market models entail? These are the 3 criteria that I think are essential. The first is that from a welfare economic point of view, the policy judgments, the criteria, need to be made explicit, and they need to be mutually consistent, and they need to be thoroughly worked out. Secondly, we need theoretical models. We need a theoretical understanding of how various labor markets work and how this labor market and that labor market interact with each other, and I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute. And these models need to be detailed and rigorous enough that they look like real economics, not just stories. And the third thing is that these models should guide and should be guided by empirical understanding. That is, we don't just want to think up theorems based on non-realistic circumstances like competitive labor markets exist all over the world. It's a nice theoretical idea, except it doesn't hold in the world, and I don't think it would be much use for guiding us in what we're doing. But what would we replace such models by? I'm going to offer you some thoughts on that in a little while. So here's a policy evaluation framework I use. I use in my own policy work. I use in every course I teach, and in fact I use in just everyday life. It has 5 parts to it. The first is to be specific about what is the policy instrument, or what are the policy instruments, what actions can be undertaken, what law might be passed, how might money be spent, what regulations might be imposed or eliminated. And being specific about what actions can be undertaken is different from saying, I wish. And any sentence begins with I wish is not followed by a policy instrument. I wish companies would share their profits with their workers, is an example. Profit maximizing companies don't do that. And I think that in turn says that I've just used a model just now. I said companies are maximizing profits. There are other models about what companies do. But why do I assume that? It's because when I was not yet 18 years old and taking my first economics course, they taught me that. But in all the years in between, I've come to believe that that's actually right. That the way we can understand why companies do what they do, why they hire people or don't, why they train them or don't, why they pay them well or pay them badly, all of that can be understood in terms of what is in their profit maximizing interest to do. That's an example of a model. Now, of course, we can be much more formal, and we are formal, and we should be, but we want to have these guiding principles as we go along. Our models need to be guided by empirical components. And if we're talking about how labor markets work, my notion of a labor market, thinking as a labor economist, is this. Okay? It's supply, demand, wage determination. Here, and here, and here, and then those are all connected through workers moving from one place to another, maybe, or trying to, firms moving from one place to another, or trying to, and that's the way that I've been trained as a labor economist to think about labor markets. You noticed I haven't used the P word. I haven't said anything about productivity, and that's because as a labor economist, I wasn't trained to think in terms of productivity, and so, there are different models out there and different empirical understandings, and I'm going to share with you my own way of thinking. If, then, you have a model that was built with theoretical and empirical components, and you take that model and you ask, what would be the consequences of a particular policy instrument, like raising a minimum wage or providing more training for a certain group of workers or something of that kind, you get predicted outcomes. And often we stop there. We talk about the predicted outcomes. You raise the wage and employers will hire fewer people, unless you're David Cardinal and Kruger, in which case you may not believe that. But that is a predicted outcome, but not the only one. There's an obvious predictable outcome of what would happen if you raise the minimum wage, is that the people who keep their jobs are going to get paid more, right? And that also is an outcome that we need to not forget about. So that in turn leads to the fourth component, which is what is, if we have just one of them, our policy evaluation criterion. Criterion is a singular word. What if there's more than one criterion? Then we have multiple criteria. And so to continue with the example of minimum wages for just a minute, if our policy evaluation criteria are those who work earn more, and more people are working, those can be our two criteria, and our policy evaluation judgment would then reflect the predicted outcomes using those criteria to decide what to do. And the answer is it depends, but we know what it depends upon. On the one hand, how much will the minimum wage raise the wage for those who keep their jobs, and by how much will a higher minimum wage reduce employment for those who lose jobs and may be pushed elsewhere into the economy. We know it depends on that. Some people have made their careers studying the elasticity of labor demand, and it's an important thing to know. So that's the framework I like to use, and that's the framework that, if I had to stop right now, but I don't, that would be what I would say is take that framework and just keep it in mind as you're developing your policy analysis. But they told me I had more time than this, and I'm going to use it. So the empirical knowledge, in Working Hard, Working Poor, I went into considerable detail about how poor people in fact work. And most of these things are familiar to most of you. Let me just look at the last, have you look at the last two. The second to last point is that the unemployment rates are lower in the developing countries of the world than they are in the richer countries. And there's a very good explanation for that. If you're very poor, you can't afford to be openly unemployed, earning nothing for very long. And so what you do is, if you can't find wage employment, which the poorer is the country, the more likely that is, people are very creative about generating their own self-employment opportunities. When I was a graduate student, I met a man in Kenya, which is where I did my field work. The way he made his living is he saved up enough money to buy a package of 20 cigarettes. And then he sold cigarettes to people poorer than himself, one cigarette at a time, at a higher unit cost than what he had paid for them. And so he used the profits to live and then buy a new pack of cigarettes, which he would then sell to other people. That's why the unemployment rate is low. It just says that's part of the problem of the unemployment rate as a measure of economic distress, is that it's a very limited measure of economic distress because, and that's the other point I want to highlight on this slide, what the developing countries have is not so much an unemployment problem. What they have is primarily an employment problem that includes not only people who are unemployed by standard ILO definitions, but includes as well, and in larger numbers and more importantly, people who are employed who are working hard and working poor. Kalavati, the woman who hand-rolled the beaties that I mentioned before, she's paid piece rate. And when she was rolling beaties, which she no longer does, although other members of her family do, they get paid per 1,000 beaties they roll. And it takes about 11 hours of nonstop work to roll 1,000 beaties, and now they earn a little bit more than $1 per 1,000 for 11 hours of work. Why are they doing that work? Because it's the best work they can do. She is not unemployed, but she is certainly part of the employment problem that people all over India and all over the developing world face. So let's keep in mind that we should be looking not just at the unemployed and whether people are working, but let's remember that we want to look at what kind of work they're doing. So the people who are working face a number of problems. I've just written them down here. I believe very strongly in the existence of segmented labor markets, good jobs, bad jobs. There's an insufficient number of good jobs. The workers, some workers get those good jobs, most workers don't, and so they have to do something else. Work is often uncertain. People were showing me here in Lima the particular places in the city where workers would congregate, and I saw a number of such street corners where workers who were hoping to get jobs that day were waiting, hoping that somebody would come pick them up to do construction work or carrying things or whatever else it was that needed to be done. That work is uncertain by definition. Some people are going to get that work, some people are not. These people have low earnings despite working long hours. They're not primarily low earners because they work few hours. They're low earners because despite working long hours, they earn so little per hour. If Kalavati is earning a little more than $1 per 11-hour day, it means she's earning about 10 cents an hour. And that's of course, makes her poor. We'll hear a lot about this at this conference because we have some of the world leaders on issues of social protections. And the poorer the country, I think you all know this, the fewer are the job-related social protections. Also, the fewer are the citizenship-related social protections in poorer countries. And then there's the problem of indecent work, which our friends at the ILO have been emphasizing for many years. Those are some of the problems that the workers face. So, among the questions to ask would be, where should we intervene in terms of labor market policy? What is the binding constraint? What is it that's preventing people from earning more? Now, skills is a focal point of this conference. What I want to say is the answer to what is the binding constraint on people's ability to earn more for the work they do may be insufficient skills, but then again it may not be. Okay? Now, what I mean by that is that the problem may be insufficient demand for people's labor for which they have skills. Okay? It's insufficient demand for the skills of construction workers, for example. And so people are good at being construction workers, it's just there's not enough demand for their labor, so there they are in the street corner hoping to be hired. But some of them are hired and some of them are not. So I think we need to have a very good idea of what the binding constraint is. And again, let me emphasize that it is not at the level of a single individual. Of course, any single individual, by virtue of being educated at this university or at my university or any other university, is going to have better opportunities. But that's not the point. We're not asking about whether that one person or a whole group of them will have better opportunities. We're asking whether the labor market outcomes are going to be better ones as a consequence of educating more people, providing them with more skills, and that's the kind of question we need to have an answer to. So how do we get an answer? We formulate, I would suggest, multi-sector labor market models. And the essence of these models would be that we would have multiple sectors, but not just sectors that are uniformly good or bad. Labor economists may know the Roy model. The Roy model was everybody has an opportunity to hunt or fish. And some people are good at hunting and other people are good at fishing. And people like me who are good at neither one would choose whichever one pays more to somebody who's completely incompetent at both. Okay? Right? But on the margin then, what would happen would be that the marginal person would earn the same in hunting and fishing. In my case, 0. That is one model. But I don't think it's the right model for the very simple reason that there really is a hierarchy of jobs. There are good jobs and bad jobs. And everybody, I think without exception, Tim Ginling did his research in Costa Rica, for example, and he found that without fail, people's earnings were predicted to be higher using standard earnings equations if they were wage employees as opposed to self-employed. Okay? And so everybody, in quotes, wanted to be a wage worker and wanted to work for the government. But of course, the government didn't hire them all. And so people then end up doing something. Now, they may wait for a long time to try to get hired in the better sectors. They may give up completely and go home, wherever home is, or they may take up a low-paying job and engage in on-the-job search while trying to get a better job. Okay, now, as I said, I wrote my doctoral dissertation on this. That was part of what I worked on at that time, was models that had multiple sectors and moving from place to place and on-the-job search, where the different sectors clearly were in a hierarchy, and that they were linked by migration behavior. That was the essence of the Harris-Todaro model, but the Harris-Todaro model did not have an urban informal sector. The Harris-Todaro model did not have on-the-job search. The Harris-Todaro model did not have workers who differed in terms of their education and skills. And so that was part of what I got a PhD for. And now, there are opportunities to build on work that was happened when I got my PhD, and I hope that some of you will take up those challenges. So how do you carry out the multi-sector labor market approach? Last year at this conference, 3 of my co-authors presented papers that we wrote about this. One of those papers was a generic model that took this idea of a labor market ladder and said wage employment is in between free entry self-employment on the one hand and skilled self-employment that requires skill and requires financial capital. So for example, somebody works in the Ford Motor Garage and learns how to be a skilled auto mechanic. He's acquired that's the skill. If he saves up enough money to buy his own tools, he sets up his own backyard auto mechanic shop and chooses to do that even though he could have been formally employed, covered by all of the social protections. And in Working Hard, Working Poor, I have a picture of precisely such a guy. But this story that I'm telling is not limited to the developing countries. And so 2 North American researchers, David Otter and Paul Beaudry, have done studies that were reported earlier this month in the New York Times. The headline was "The Downward Ramp." The downward ramp is that as more and more people get educated, what they do is that they don't find jobs of the type that they had hoped to find, and so what they do is that they take up lesser jobs, which in turn push other people out of those lesser jobs. And the part that doesn't appear here, because the spacing is different here on what you see from what I had originally prepared, is that the people at the bottom end up with no jobs at all. And this is what the authors are saying is happening in North America. I think it's been happening all over the world. I called it bumping in the labor market on the basis of education and skills. So how do we intervene in such a world? Well, there are a number of ways in which we can help the poor earn their way out of poverty. I've listed them here. You can all read them. I don't need to repeat them. Just want to say that development of skills pervades all of these. What is it that would help generate more paid employment or help raise self-employment earnings? Having more skilled people who are able to do work better so that employers will want to hire them so that they can produce more if they're self-employed. So skills is a part of all of this. I didn't make it its own category when I wrote the book, and I think that I made the right decision then, that skills are everywhere. It's not that they're just one section compared to others. So which sectors, which activities would be the ones that would be most worthwhile? We need country-specific, we may need context-specific labor market modeling. The Harris-Tadaro model was designed to fit Kenya. The Lewis model before that was designed to fit the Caribbean. Other models have been formulated. The ones that we worked on in our analyses were meant to fit China and India. And the China and India models are different from each other. The China model has the hukou system. The India model has seasonality in agriculture as a fundamental feature. So we don't have a general answer. We have conditional answers. This kind of economy, this, that kind of economy, that. And so the World Bank in the World Development Report on Jobs did us a service by saying that there were different kinds of economies. I know you can't read this, it's too small. On the left are 8 different kinds of job challenges: agrarian economies, conflict-affected countries, and so on. And on the right are what are the good jobs for development in each of those 8 types of economies. And the answer is conditional. But that's the good thing to know, is that there isn't one size-fits-all kind of labor market model. It is rather that there are different conditional answers we can give depending on what the conditions in the countries are. So people sometimes ask me, how do you know what the conditions in the countries are? I tell them I have several different models in mind. I get off the plane and I go and look. And I go to conferences like this and I read papers and I talk to people and I try to find out what the conditions are. And that's why I come to these conferences, is so I have, and why I come to these countries, so I have a better understanding of what the conditions are in different places. Let me talk specifically about education and skills development for a few minutes. From time to time, I've participated in World Bank missions in a variety of places and on a variety of issues. At one point, I was a one-person World Bank mission to Gambia, which is a little teeny country in West Africa. So picture a river that runs into the ocean. Picture a little English-speaking country along the borders of the river and extending a few miles in either direction, surrounded by Senegal, which is French-speaking. And that little English-speaking country along the river is Gambia. So I was asked by the World Bank to go and assess the education sector and come back with a report on what looked to be a high priority use of a development loan in the education sector in that particular country. So what I set out to do, people who know me know that I ask questions. I should say parenthetically I'm Jewish. There's a joke about Jews, which is, question is, why did Jews answer a question with a question? And the Jewish respondent says, why did you ask that? I like to ask questions. And so here I've posed 2 questions. Which level of education to prioritize and how to intervene at that level, and that was what I set out to learn about during that mission. So I went and I visited some schools. One was a school literally under a tree. One was a primary school, that's the one in the upper right, on your slide that had been built largely by the community. The one in the lower left was a secondary school. You see these girls in school uniforms sitting on a dirt floor in a corrugated iron building on the equator. It was impossibly hot. I don't know how anybody could learn anything in such a building. And then you see the chemistry lab in the Gambia College. It had nice glassware and no chemicals. And so these were some of the things that I saw during that trip. So I did lots of research into basic magnitudes and things, but one question was, how much does the government spend per pupil in the country's currency, which is called a dalasi? How much do they spend at different levels of education? Here you see the numbers. It turned out that the Minister of Education didn't know these numbers. She just knew it was more expensive in the Gambia College than the primary schools. And when I asked her in the beginning of this trip, so what are your priorities? She said secondary technical education. When I asked her why, she said, because all these people are coming and knocking on my door and they say, we want their sons and daughters to go there. But they didn't have primary school spaces for about half the primary school age kids. That's partly because there were no schools in some places. In other places, there were incomplete schools. You know, when you start a school, typically you start with first grade, and then the next year you add a second grade, and so on. And a lot of these schools didn't have all of the grades. And so here, this is how much the per pupil expenditure was in the Gambia College. If you think about what it might have cost to send Gambian to Cornell University, it would have been many, many times that. So I presented these figures to the minister, and basically she concluded that the priority was primary education. Why? Because primary education was the cheapest, because primary education was the most important, because there were schools there were villages that didn't have schools. There were schools that were incomplete. There were schools that were complete and didn't have books in them and other sorts of supplies. So that's what she concluded was most important. What had made her change her mind was just simply looking at these numbers and having them presented to her and making her confront the opportunity cost. To use resources for one purpose means not to use them for another. So essentially the question was, Madam Minister, the World Bank is proposing a loan in the education sector. She knew what the amount of that loan was. I knew what the amount of that loan was. How would you use this money, which is so limited that you can't do all of these education levels? You can only, you only have money to intervene in one of them, or you could divide your money among them, but then you can do even less of each one. And that was the answer she gave. So policymakers can be taught to think like economists. I don't know if that's good or bad, but they can. And that is to say that one of our basic essential ideas is that we have budget constraints. To use resources for one purpose means not to use them for another. So how would we go about making decisions? Okay. We want to look at social costs and social benefits. All of us who are trained economists learned to maximize by looking at marginal benefits and marginal costs, not averages. We should be looking at social benefits, not social costs, because one person's gain may be somebody else's loss. Okay? Here's a thought experiment. What would go into market level analysis? Happily for economists and for economics graduate students, if we train one more PhD in economics or one more batch of PhDs in economics, we will have that many more employed economists in the world, and which is one of the reasons that people go to graduate school in economics. If we train, as we do, more people with PhDs in comparative literature, what we're going to have is no more PhD comparative literature professors. We're going to have many more unemployed and underemployed comparative literature PhDs who will do things like tutor in French people like me who would like to learn the language, but they are not going to be able to do that which they began to study. So how should we not make our policy judgments? On the basis of individual level analysis. And we do that so often that typically we don't realize that's what we're doing. We run a Mincer equation, and we say those individuals with more education earn the Mincer rate of return on their investment, okay? What literally we're learning is that on average, that is the differential across individuals, those who have more education and those who have less. It does not tell us whether the economy as a whole would get that 14% rate of return or whatever the number is if we were to invest in the education and skills of the people. But that's the question that we should be asking when we're doing social cost benefit analysis. Do analysis at the market level, not at the individual level. So here's an excuse I've heard, that it's too hard to do market level analysis, so I won't. I'll just do the standard microanalysis across individuals, microanalysis across firms, and see what I get. Honestly, I don't think that's good enough. And I hope we can try to do better by asking the right questions, where the right questions are what would happen in the economy as a whole, in the labor market as a whole, if we were to educate more people, provide more people with skills of whatever kind we're talking about, what would happen in the market as a whole, as opposed to what would happen to the particular individuals who get that education and skills, who may be displacing others from the same kinds of jobs. It's better to answer the right questions approximately than the wrong questions exactly. Now, coming back to my story about the keys, right? If this is the question that we want to ask, then we, I think, should challenge ourselves to try to address that question directly, even though it may be hard to do. But at least we want to look in the right place. So I want to conclude with two last slides. And a final thought. The two last slides are that in doing policy making, I've tried to share with you some ways to do this kind of labor market policy modeling I was talking about. There are some pitfalls, and I've listed them here, but I'm right at the end of my time, so I'll not say anything more about that. This is a conference where often we challenge each other to do a certain kind of labor market research. And what I've listed here are questions that, honest to goodness, if there were a session, and maybe there is, and if there is a session where one of these questions is answered, please tell me which session it is, so if I can attend it, I would like to hear what the answer is. The four questions, I'm Jewish, there's also a significance to four questions, but I'm not going to get into that. First, how people in developing countries are working and why they are doing what they are doing. Second question, what are the useful, empirically grounded theoretical models of labor markets that we could use in various developing country contexts? The India model would probably apply pretty well to Pakistan or Bangladesh. It would probably not apply very well to Peru or Colombia. The third is, as I've said, to do the sector level and market level analysis of various labor market outcomes, as opposed more to individual level analysis. And a fourth priority is to try to do the in-depth empirical analysis on which particular policy interventions would matter how much, specifically in terms of social benefits and social costs. Okay? Notice I emphasize social. I did not say private benefits. I did not say private costs. Nor would I say, by the way, just private benefits without regard to private costs. But how do the social benefits and the social costs compare? So I started with a joke about the keys. I conclude with remember the keys. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think Gary Field did not surprise us, delivered a fantastic speech, a lot of inspiration for the discussion of the next couple of days. Now I think I would like to have questions, comments you might have on Gary's. He rose a number of points. I think if possible it's useful to get to this, not the last but last slide, in which you sort of highlight a number of key messages, which I think are very useful.
Somebody has to get us back
for the discussion. Yeah. But let me open the floor to questions to Gary. Who want to start? Ian, is there a microphone? I think you have to speak up.
And in some sense, that's the right way to look at it, and we should. And you've, if anything, emphasized a little bit the labor supply, the individuals. Of course, large part of them, they are self-employed, so that's clear. But could you say a few words on the labor demand, on the firms? Right? Your minister in Gambia talked about people coming to her saying, that's what we want as skills.
Okay,
what do the firms say they want as skills? What have we as a profession done? Have we done enough? Should we put more emphasis on that side as opposed to the other side, or the intersection of the two?
The firms often say they want skills, and maybe they do, but they also want the skills without paying for them. Okay, so they're not going to train the people to be skilled in a particular way, nor do they want to pay higher wages to people who are skilled or not. Yeah.
Say they don't have enough workers.
That's right. So
have you thought of raising the wage a little bit? And they say, what are you talking about?
you see, he's a trained labor economist too, right? Okay, so trained labor economists don't believe that there are such things as labor shortages, right? If there's a labor shortage, it's because they haven't raised the wage enough yet, and so they're going to do that. But you see, so this model is labor supply, labor demand, and a wage determination process, which may or may not be wages being determined by supply and demand. It could be wages determined by unions, minimum wages, or something else. So when I said before, what's the binding constraint for the employment of people in any given economy, it may not be the lack of skills. It may be the lack of demand for people who have certain skills. And that's really important because, again, if you're confronting opportunity costs, would you use your money to build skills, or would you use your money to try to incentivize employers to create more employment? I just want to commend India for creating a National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which spends 2% of GDP on raising the demand for labor. Essentially, you supply your labor there, they have to give you a job.
Let me raise a question myself. I think the number of messages you deliver. One, I think we have to have a very clear model in mind, and model that suit well the economy we are looking at. I think that's a very important message you say. Second, we have to have clear in mind what we are looking at here. Having a social cost and benefit analysis in mind, take into account that most countries have a budget constraint, so they have to focus the resources on those areas where they can deliver the best results. I think an issue that we find more and more in whatever countries we are is also lack of coordination between different actors. When you think about building skills, you're thinking about an intertemporal decision. You make a decision about where to invest your resources in terms of building the skills, and then these skills will be developed, people will enter into the labor market, and so on and so forth. And more we find that there is a little dialogue between those who are responsible for building the skills, those who are responsible for improving and maintaining these skills, and those who are supposed to actually to make sure there's a good matching in the labor market. So Ministry of Education, Ministry of Employment, don't you think that, while you identify the objective, you also have to have a good dialogue between the different actors, including the employers themselves? I think I fully agree with Jan. They tend to complain they cannot find the right skill in the market. They are less eager to invest in a dialogue, in a decision-making process on how to build the skills and how to maintain and improve the skills for those already into the labor market.
Yes. Okay, so, right, I think you're absolutely right that there needs to be such dialogue. When I was first working in Latin America, it was in Colombia. Colombia had those ministries that you just mentioned. It also had a Department of National Planning, and the Minister of National Planning was himself a PhD labor economist from Berkeley. And so he was the person who heard these different cases and laid it out. Other countries, they have people like Larry Summers, who heads the President's Council on Economic Policy or something. So ideally, there's somebody that's doing that. In the absence of that, you're right, it's a complete free-for-all. And whoever can scream the loudest and who's best connected is going to get the money.